Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrow with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, April 30th, 2015. I want to take a moment and thank all of you that sent emails and comments on YouTube and on the website about the passing of Georgianne Hughes. I truly appreciate all your comments that you have sent, and I know that her son does as well. And I did want to make a little announcement before I get to today's news. And I'm laughing because I have something to tell you about today's news and views. But anyway, the other announcement I had to make is I have not heard from her son, John, any more details about what he's planning. He did tell me that he was planning to keep the Bite Show up online as long as he could. And he made it sound a bit like he was planning perhaps to continue doing some interviews himself. Now, I have not heard with him. Obviously, he's been busy and grieving the past week and a half, so I have not heard from him since then. But I'm sure that I will eventually, and I will keep you posted. Now, let's get to today's news and views, because this is a weird one. It was actually posted online yesterday by the Washington Post. And I woke up this morning to find this particular article in my email inbox from so many of you that I had to comment about this article. And I thought, well, gee, I wonder, the Washington Post's articles are about as deep as a puddle. They don't go into very much detail. They don't say much. It's typical sixth grade level American newspaper nonsense. And even more, well, maybe fifth grade, given the fact that it's the Washington Post. But I read through this and I thought, that's why everybody's sending it to me. I want you to listen to the title of this article. And then I'm going to read from the article about 6 paragraphs here, all right? And then I'm going to give you my usual high-octane speculation about what I think is going on here. The title of the article is, "In a Speech to Congress, Abe lays out more assertive role for Japan," unquote. Now, of course, this is referring to the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who addressed a joint session of Congress yesterday. And I want to point out in the 6th paragraph in this article, the Washington Post notes that Abe is the first Japanese Prime Minister, the first Japanese head of government to address Congress in history. All right. So in other words, this was a history-making event. Now, some of you may recall that the late Emperor Hirohito, when he was still alive, made a visit to the United States when President Reagan was still in the White House. But being the head of state, the emperor did not address Congress. So this is the first real Japanese leader to address the American Congress in a joint session. Now, that's huge, and we're going to find out why it's huge here in a minute. Now, let me start with the 2nd paragraph here. No, actually, I'm going to skip into a little bit down the article and read you some paragraphs about what part of this visit is about. Quote, "The United States and Japan have not agreed on a handful of critical areas in the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership talks, including," listen carefully, "agriculture and automobiles." But Abe said he had hoped to use his address to help prod his own parliament to support overhauls that would pave the way for an agreement next month. "The Trans-Pacific Partnership goes far beyond just economic benefit," Abe said. Excuse me. "It is also about our security. Long term, its strategic value is awesome. We should never forget that. Mindful that Japan's neighbors, including China and South Korea, have been concerned about the nationalistic strain in Abe's governance, the Prime Minister on his trip to Washington has been trying to emphasize that Japan needs to pursue a peaceful role in world affairs even as it becomes more assertive. Now, let me pause right there and recall for you something that we heard in a very similar vein from the other major member of the Axis during World War II last year. Recall that German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier gave that speech to German businessmen in the hotel in Berlin, where he said that it was time for Germany, being a world power, to act like one, essentially, and take a much more, and these were his words, militaristic stance in its foreign policy. All right? So, in other words, what we have now are the two major Axis powers. Italy hasn't yet made any statements, so we have the two major Axis powers saying, okay, we're going to be peaceful, but we're going to take a much more aggressive role on the world stage. Now, before we get to the beginning of this article, and what made me really sit up and take notice, is I'm going to make a prediction here, folks. What you're seeing now is the beginning of a push, first of all, for Japan and Germany to become permanent UN Security Council members and having a veto, just like France, Great Britain, Russia, China, and so on, and the United States. So in other words, we're seeing something, I think, here being done to create a change of the way that the UN is constituted. We may see this veto go to a majority of the permanent members on the UN Security Council to pass or vote down a measure. We don't know. But I'm suspecting that as Germany and Japan become more assertive and yet peaceful, to use Abe's paraphrase here, as this happens, they are going to press for UN recognition of that status. Now, why am I bothering you with all this? Because there's something very interesting at the very beginning of this article, and see if you can catch it, because this is a big hint that there may be two ways to parse or interpret what may be going on here. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe hailed a new chapter in Japan's, quote, alliance of hope, unquote, with the United States on Wednesday as he sketched out his vision for a more robust role for his nation in the security and prosperity of Asia. Now, let me stop. One gentleman that sent me this article says it's an alliance of hope because he hopes there won't be another Fukushima. In other words, implying that the United States may have been behind that. Let me continue. In the historic address to a joint meeting of Congress, Abe paid respects to shared history 70 years after the end of World War II, but he emphasized that it was time for Japan to turn the page and modernize its relationship. Tokyo, he told U.S. lawmakers, is, quote, resolved to take yet more responsibility for the peace and stability in the world, unquote. Quote, this reform is the first of its kind and a sweeping one in our post-war history, unquote, Abe said, referring to new laws he's pushing through Parliament that would allow Japan's self-defense forces to respond, listen carefully, if the United States is attacked by a third country, unquote. All right? Now, folks, I think there's something going on here. And like I said, there's two ways to parse this. Either Abe came to the United States to address the joint session of Congress in the form of a suppliant ally, informing his masters that he is doing his best to do their bidding and beef up Japan's military and rearmament process by ramming these constitutional changes through the Japanese imperial diet. All right? Either he's doing that, or he's coming to the United States and serving notice that Japan is going to rearm and beef up its military defenses, but to reassure us that everything's okay and we're still your friends, and so on and so forth. Now, I suspect that it may be a bit of both, because that one line at the end of the fourth paragraph in the Washington Post article, where it says that Japan's forces would be allowed to respond if the United States was attacked by a third country. Now, this is going to be very interesting, because Japan is going to have to spell out that it is not going to come to the aid of the United States unless it is attacked. Just like the NATO countries do not send troops into all of these wars that the United States starts, Japan is going to have to do the same thing. But there's something else I think that may be going on here. And this is why I suspect that Abe isn't so much coming over and saying that we're going to do this, we're going to be your compliant lapdogs and rearm and remilitarize. I suspect that in part he was being pressured to do so, because this is an indication that the American financial and military and political elite are now very worried. And the reason they're worried is, as I've been emphasizing in many of these news and views over the past couple of years, is that the crazy, insane, counterintuitive American foreign policy has managed to alienate just about every major ally that the United States has. Or perhaps a better way to put it would be had. So in other words, a firm statement from Japan that it is rearming, and number two, is going to take a much more assertive role on the world stage as befits its status as a world power. This is meant to be a signal to the emerging bloc that we've seen come out of nowhere in the last 10 years. Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, the so-called BRICS bloc. But let us add to this that the European powers have made it very clear in no uncertain terms that they're not too happy with Washington's tinkering in the Ukraine with the sanctions and so on, even though they're straddling the fence and playing the usual European powers game. So this is going to be interesting. This is a sign, I think, of very, very increased weakness on the part of the United States. Its military is overstretched, all right? And I don't think, and folks, let me be very clear here, this is a long-term thing. This is not simply something that a new administration can come in, increase military spending in the United States, and fix the problem. This is a much longer-term problem, and we're going to see more and more statements like this. Watch this one carefully, because Japan, in a certain sense, is serving notice. The game has changed. We've watched your actions on the world stage. You are, as a moral example, unreliable. As an ally, unreliable. We are going to have to start defending ourselves. I think this is the real message here, folks. So watch. There's going to be more of it. I make the prediction that Japan and Germany over the next several years are going to be pressing increasingly for a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. And eventually, folks, they're going to get it. All right. So good news, folks. The Axis powers are back. That's it for this week's news and views. And I'll see you all on the flip side. God bless everybody.